What on earth is happening in our satanic society? Stick around for Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Our guest today has a online website called whatonearthishappening.com, and he can be heard weekly on Saturday nights, RBN, as a radio talk show host. His name is Mark Passio, and he also has a background as a priest of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's famous church. So he'll be discussing what on earth is going on from the point of view of this satanic hierarchy. Why are they turning our society on its head? You'll want to catch this one. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Sean, thanks so much for inviting me on to Buzzsaw. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I just want to start with your background a little bit, because you have an interesting point of view. You come from the Church of Satan, which people oftentimes think is a bit of a not a hoax, but sort of it was a bit of a horse and pony show, right? Where Anton LaVey liked to dress up and have these, put on makeup and kind of make his eyebrows look really weird. And people thought it was not really, they didn't really amount to anything. It was just sort of, it was contrarian in a sense, right? Contrarian to a religious society when he established it in 1966. What drew you to the church, and what did you ultimately discover in that process of becoming a priest?
Sure. Well, I'd like to say I'm certainly no longer affiliated with that organization in any way. I was involved in it after I kind of developed a lot of disdain for organized religion. I was brought up in a pretty standard Roman Catholic background in South Philadelphia, and I was given a lot of religious dogma by family members, by school teachers, etc. And I accepted that pretty much without much questioning. I came from a family background where I would say that my family members kind of accept the status quo and just kind of pass it along and say, that's just the way the world is, and they're not really people who question things and question the status quo. So, in my late grade school and early high school years, when I really began to kind of question these dogmatic beliefs, I developed a lot of anger about them, because I didn't really understand what religion was at the time as a control system. I certainly didn't understand astrotheology. I didn't have a lot of the knowledge to put religious indoctrination and dogma into any sort of a framework that made any sense. So it all turned into a lot of anger when I began to kind of reject those belief systems and realize that they, were not really the truth, and they were being used as another form of control in society. That anger didn't really have an outlet. So what I looked for was I tried to gravitate toward the antithesis of any kind of a religious belief system into the system in which I was born. I wanted the opposite of that. And so I found it in the form of dark occultism in general, but specifically the ideology of Satanism. Now, when you say that term to people, they think, devil, in the red suit with the pitchfork and tail and horns, the Christian conception of the devil. This is not what the organized ideology or religion of modern day Satanism is at all. It does. Now, you could find Satanists who accept and believe in that archetypal image and, may accept that that exists, but that is not what the overall ideology of Satanism is about. And we can get to what it's really about, but people have a erroneous notion of what Satanism really is. But I was drawn into Satanism and dark occultism because it espoused the exact opposite of religious dogmatic teachings. It was largely atheistic, and it was, an ideology that was really all about the self. Right. So I espoused this ideology through writing and music, and eventually some of that work that I had done in music and in writing was recognized by the then high priest of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. He appointed me to the rank of priest within his organization, the Church of Satan. And as my involvement in Satanism in general, not just the Church of Satan after I had been appointed a priest within that organization, as my involvement in dark occultism and Satanism in general grew, with involvement in some other groups that were aside from the Church of Satan and involved dark occultists in general, I began to become aware that these people were not just isolated groups of individuals that were working with hidden knowledge, which is what occultism is. It's knowledge that is not known by the general population about how the human mind works and how the laws of nature work. And these weren't just people that were trying to use this knowledge and work with it because they had their own personal reasons for doing so. And they just wanted to increase their own personal power in the world. They were individuals that were working with this knowledge in a very, very tight-knit way, in a network, in a hierarchical system throughout the world. And they were comprised of an eclectic variety of people from every walk of life. You name the social institution, you name the part of our society, and there were Satanists involved in it at high levels and positions of power and influence. Banking, media, law, military, law enforcement, entertainment, technology, medicine, education, you name the walk of life, you name the social institution, and they were involved in it at high levels.
Do you mean now Church of Satan Satanists, or what we would call Satanists based on the philosophy?
Both. However, I would largely use the term general Satanists, that were dark occultists.
Right.
These were people that, essentially held the same basic tenets of this belief system, which we can get into. And they were using this knowledge that they hold about how the mind works to manipulate people. And they were using the knowledge about the laws of nature to basically understand how whole dynamic societal forces work to bring people under their rulership. It wasn't people working separately just for their own personal benefit. It was a tight-knit unit of people throughout our entire society that was working very closely together in a networked, hierarchical, compartmentalized structure that was working toward a common goal. And that goal was to increase their own collective power, the collective power of this worldwide cult, you could call it, at the expense of everyone else's rights and freedoms to eventually create a worldwide dictatorship and worldwide slavery.
Wow. So let's get into then the essence of this doctrine, because it's not something LaVey created, obviously. I mean,
absolutely
what was
not.
he tapping into? Well, because again, I always wondered myself: was LaVey an agent of some higher instrument? Well,
Yes.
who was LaVey really, and what was he tapping into?
That's a really great question and critically important to understand, because whenever I tell this story, people usually say, oh, you're trying to say the Church of Satan is in control of the world. These are the masters of the world. Absolutely not. The Church of Satan was actually what I would consider a low-level satanic organization. And the levels of this hierarchy go way beyond the Church of Satan. I would say LaVey was sort of a lapdog or a puppet for higher-level satanic quote-unquote elites that were really much higher up in the hierarchy of dark occultism than anyone in the Church of Satan. It's very important to understand Satanism has existed as an ideology for tens of thousands of years. We are not talking about something that was invented by Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey, I subsequently learned through involvement with Satanism that he was actually charged by the higher up Satanists and dark occultists, Luciferians, dark Luciferians as I refer to them, to write the Satanic Bible and to put out the ideology in a condensed, kind of crystallized, yet somewhat watered down form, to appeal to the masses, to appeal to the everyday man and woman on the street, to bring them involved into Satanism in general, dark occultism in general, through the Church of Satan, which was acting as what I call a psychological vetting and filtration system. So they're the public interface of this dark occult network. They are interfacing with the general population, the public, to try to identify and find people and bring them up through their ranks, a grooming process of sorts, people who have specific characteristic traits, personality traits, and most importantly, skill sets that this hierarchical network of dark occultism in general can use and exploit. If they can get people into their ideology at a lower level and then bring them into an organization, then psychologically vet them to see if they're the kind of psychopathic personality type that they're really looking for to have further involvement within their organization, to basically use as they see fit, to exploit their skill set as they see fit and get them to help with their agenda. So when I realized that that's what this organization was really all about, and what the overarching agenda of Satanism in general, dark occultism in general was, I had realized that I had become aware, become involved in a syndicate, an organized syndicate that was really advancing human slavery, which was never something that I was about. I got involved in this because in my youth I was a very naive, selfish, and ego-driven human being. Essentially, I did not have, real knowledge that was passed on to me by family members, friends, or anything like that. And that ignorance led me to, an organization such as this. But when I recognized what it was really about, I still had a modicum of conscience, and that conscience would not allow me to go forward with further involvement with these groups, even the low-level ones. So I started pulling back my involvement and eventually kind of verbalized to some of them that I wasn't comfortable with the intentions of the group. And many people will think, well, wouldn't they try to do something harmful to you? Weren't they extraordinarily upset, tried to keep you involved, or threatened you if you wanted to leave? And the answer, surprisingly, to many people is no, absolutely not. They did not try to keep me involved. They did not care that I was leaving. They showed absolutely no concern.
Right.
You could say I didn't know, quote unquote, where the bodies were buried, if you want to look at it that way. I wasn't involved in any level that involved, any kind of violent crime or anything such as that. So I guess they looked at it like, well, what you have seen is not even close to where it goes. Even though you understand essentially what this is all about. And their attitude was, go and do your worst, tell people what you think you understand and know about what's going on here. They'll never accept it, they'll never believe it anyway. We own society, we own these people's minds, lock, stock, and barrel. And there's no way you're going to ever break that. You'll be banging your head against the wall for the rest of your life. So go and try to do your worst. There's nothing that you could say or do that can hurt us anyway, because we have people's minds in society in general so under our mind control, so under our manipulation, that a few of them actually said to me that if we came forward ourselves as people who are higher up within this network, within this structure that basically works through mind control, they would not accept the truth from us.
Yeah.
If we told them exactly how and why we are doing what we are doing in this society, people wouldn't accept it from us because they're so mind controlled and they're so manipulated. They can't admit that they've been duped and that they've bought into our ideology at a lower level.
Well, that's the mind war that's been perpetrated against our society in particular, but I think it's also global. Now, I was going to ask you, in your experience before you left the church, did you ever encounter during a ritual, for example, anything of a supernatural or unearthly phenomenon, something that made you believe these dark occultists are in collusion with entities or powers that are not of the three-dimensional physical world, and that's really ultimately where they're driving their sense of power and authority and their faith from?
Yes, my honest answer to that is no, I did not encounter anything in the quote-unquote supernatural realm or quote-unquote demonic realm or other dimensional entities. The rituals that they conducted, at least in the groups that I was involved in, involved psychodramatic role play, energy gathering, and focus, and what they believed was energy sending along the ethers, if you will, to a remote target. Okay, so, and this could be done for benevolent purposes or malevolent purposes, to help someone and send them needed energy if they were involved in their agenda and they wanted to, help out their cause from someone who was working with them, or to send malevolent energies to someone who might be blocking or standing in the way of their agenda in some way, and they wanted to send negative and harmful energies to other people.
Right.
These were called compassion and destruction rituals, which is the kind that I took part in. However, they, at least again, these groups did not do any things that you would consider, quote, conjurations. They did not really call, I mean, in the rituals, they called upon names of entities and things like that, but there was no attempt to actually bring them physically into their presence, into physical manifestation, as people often envision occult rituals to be about. That was not done in the groups that I was involved in.
Right.
Does that happen in certain levels of dark occultism? I would absolutely not doubt it. However, that was not done in the groups that I was involved in.
But what you're saying now, the energy projection is very important, because this is something that we see on a daily basis through the media, through certain, for example, pop stars and the songs. And
Sure.
we know historically people like Led Zeppelin and others have been, groups like Led Zeppelin and Beatles and The Doors have really been enamored by Aleister Crowley, right? And then there's this question of whether or not they were, invoking spirits in their music, and, the idea of backmasking, right? That if you listen to the lyrics in reverse, you can hear, a different message. The point being that there's all these people who are, if we think about it, more driven by the ego, who would be willing, for example, to take whatever whatever deal is necessary, sell the soul even,
Yes.
to attain that level of stardom and power. And in the process, then they are projecting out imagery through music videos, frequencies through music, philosophies and psychological triggers through film, right, to basically influence our society. Is that really what you basically were able to understand as a result of your experience?
Absolutely, that, what you just laid out there, without a doubt, is going on and taking place. And I feel that it does actually work, because, I mean, you just look at our society around us and how it has completely changed, how they have actually propagated the satanic ideology through the mass media, through the mass conditioning of human beings. I mean, maybe this is a good time to get into what their overarching ideology really is, because, again, many people hear Satanism and they just think, teenagers going out and lighting fires in the woods and sacrificing animals, these satanic, quote, dabblers,
right,
is what they think of as Satanism. The really Hollywood kind of propagandic notion of what Satanism is.
As opposed to the idea of role and gender reversals, as opposed to the idea of an anti-humanist philosophy, right?
That's right.
It's the fundamental base of Satanism. And so, slavery and the nature of empires and debt slavery, for example, is satanic. And, basically the policy of exterminating half the world's population because there's too many
Eugenics,
people,
yes.
That's satanic. And yet we don't use those words. So,
see, it's because people really haven't looked into what the ideology is. And, if I had to really reword it, I would call it simply selfishness-ism, okay, for lack of a better term. It's ultimately, if I had to concress the ideology of Satanism down to one basic way of looking at the world, it's that I come first before everything else, and I don't care who else suffers, as long as it's not affecting me. That's Satanism. That is Satanism to a T. That is Satanism in a nutshell. It is a me, selfish worldview, self-centered worldview, service to self only worldview, where everybody, the people involved in this ideology, from the minute they wake up to the minute they fall asleep at night, okay, are only focused on what they can do for themselves, and they don't care about the suffering or the injustices that anyone else in the world goes through.
Well,
that's what they want out there in society.
The iGeneration. The whole concept of this, the iPod, the iMac. It may have been a pun, but very much symbolically interesting. The fact that the apple was chosen.
That's right.
Right, as the image for Macintosh, right? Because what is the apple? It was given by the so-called devil, according to the biblical theology.
The whole idea that it was originally the I was originally intended to mean internet when the first iMac came out, but it is very symbolically interesting, almost synchromistic, if you will, that, this has been the basis of a very ego-driven society that has really it hasn't really united people. All of this technology has kind of driven a wedge between people socially, if you ask me. But to go back to what these overarching tenets of Satanism was, it would be kind of illuminating for people to really understand what this ideology is about, because once you understand what it's about, you'll see how prevalent it is in our modern society. It's everywhere. They've turned society into a satanic culture, in effect.
Right.
So the first tenet is that the self comes before everything else. And self-preservation is the highest aspiration of humanity. Now, does that mean, we should not have any interest in self-preservation or survival? No, of course not. That's what the biological functions of all human beings is to survive, thrive, propagate, et cetera. There's nothing wrong with those things. They're a part of the natural process. What this is about is that process taken to a completely ego-driven, on steroids type effect. It's, again, as I laid out, only caring about the self, not caring about what goes on in any kind of a wider sense. And it puts self-preservation on a pedestal above everything else, most of all, including morality. It puts it on a pedestal up above, caring about what's right or wrong at all. If it's good for you, it's good, do it. If it's bad for you, and
do what thou wilt is the whole of the law.
Exactly, but without the caveat after that of love is the law, love under will.
Right.
That's separated from Satanism. It's just do what thou wilt, period, and don't get caught doing it. If it harms somebody else, and other people might come after you and want kind of retribution or anything like that as a result of what you did to them to get ahead.
Right.
It just says go and get ahead, do whatever you have to, no matter who you really have to step on to get where you want to be. And that's the dog-eat-dog world that we see in our modern culture. We see people who don't care about other people. We see people who are cutthroat, are ruthless, will do anything to get ahead, will stab a knife in anybody's back for the little modicum of pushing themselves forward to the level that they want to be at in society. And that's the ego-driven notion that Satanism is ultimately about. It's about the pure worship of the self, and there is absolutely no true standards of morality, which brings us to the second tenet or principle of Satanism, and that is moral relativism. Moral relativism is the belief that there is no such thing as an objective standard of right and wrong behavior that exists in nature. That these are human-invented constructs that mankind gets to make up and be the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. And again, in Satanism, essentially it's like what is right for me is what is right behavior, and what is wrong for me is what is wrong behavior that I shouldn't engage in. It has nothing to do whether someone else or another being is harmed or injured in any way.
Right.
It only has to do with the self, which is again in keeping with this me mentality, this very selfish, ego-oriented mentality.
There's no heart-based consciousness, the idea of the feelings or emotions of others, and also even our own feelings and emotions. They say the Satanist detaches from the heart, right? The whole point.
Well, not entirely, because they care about themselves and their own. So, but anybody that stands in the way of the self and your own, whoever can help you achieve what you want to achieve, they're basically treated without any emotion whatsoever. So, they do have a form of what I call dark care. They very much care about their agendas. They care about what they want to put into effect in the world. They care about who can help them do that, how they can go about doing that. You could look at it as very, very focused willpower and intent. I call it dark care.
Sociopathic,
exactly,
basically.
Exactly. So, moral relativism feeds very nicely into the third and fourth tenets of Satanism. Because if you're only really focused on yourself and you don't believe there's any objective right or wrong behavior, invariably you're going to slip into this ideology, and society is going to slip into this ideology known as social Darwinism. And most people out there really are social Darwinists. Social Darwinism is this extension of Darwinian macrobiological evolutionary theory that basically states that since in the animal kingdom, Darwinism postulates that there's the survival of the fittest, and those who are the fittest propagate their genes, whereas those who are not fit don't get to propagate their genes. This is a scientifically actually not in reality a true notion. Okay, it's the survival of the fittest doesn't mean the most ruthless wins out in the end. This is where most people take this and then bring it into the human realm, and apply this notion to human beings and say, well, if he's in the position where he has all this money and influence and power, his genes somehow must have got him there. You could see how the elite really want to propagate this notion, the quote-unquote elite. They want to propagate the notion that they're somehow genetically superior to everybody else. And moreover, they want to propagate the notion that society should somehow be structured in a way that is, quote, dog eat dog, and is about the propping up of the most ruthless, or the ones who are the most willing to basically step on everybody else to get to where they are in the social hierarchy and the social structure. This is called social Darwinism. And again, it stems out of this Darwinian macrobiological evolutionary theory, which really isn't how the species propagates itself through this notion of survival of the fittest. It's largely more about natural selection through the ones who understand and have more consciousness regarding their environment. And that's what humanity is lacking right now, is consciousness regarding what's really going on around us. Most importantly, what's going on within the human mind that's creating what's going on around us.
Right.
So social Darwinism is a very dangerous and slippery slope into the final tenet of Satanism, the final ideological component of this religion, which is eugenics. If the most ruthless people got to the top, and their genes got them there, well, the idea goes something like, shouldn't they be able to basically decide how the society is structured and moves forward? And what better way to do that than to decide who gets to propagate their genes and who does not get to propagate their genes? Or in other words, in simpler terms, who gets to live and survive and who must die? That's right. Eugenics. And these four belief systems taken in tandem with each other are what I call the four main ideological tenets of the satanic belief system, the satanic ideology, the satanic religion. Self-preservation as the highest aspiration for the individual, moral relativism, social Darwinism, and eugenics. And if you look at our society, the vast majority of people, although they may not be able to quite articulate those things and explain what they are, if you ask them if they agree with certain of these tenets, more likely than not, they are more likely to say, yes, they do agree. I would say that society has been conditioned, has been manipulated, has been mind-controlled into a satanic mindset without most people even realizing that they are espousing or that they are holding satanic beliefs.
Well, it's very simple. I mean, they've been conned by the term freedom. You see, I mean, the point being that, freedom is wonderful, but absolute freedom is also is actually Satanism, right? The idea that there are no limits, that there are no boundaries, that we can do whatever we choose to do, whatever pleases us, right? This sort of Benthamite philosophy, like whatever makes me feel good is good, right?
Exactly.
What makes me feel bad is bad. And what you said in terms of your tenets of of the satanic philosophy, all reinforces the fact that there is no God in that worldview. Right. There is no God. Right. There is no higher good in that worldview.
That's right. And man is the highest power in nature, and therefore, since there is no force that's going to make us basically come to terms with the consequences of our behavior, or deliver to us consequences for our behaviors, right, then we could just get to do whatever we want. We could say this is right.
Yeah, we become gods ourselves, especially those who believe in the eugenics philosophy as well.
That's right.
I can now become the god.
the Nazi society. They were basically saying we are on our way to becoming gods because we have all the powers of a god, total information, omniscience, all powerful, omnipotence, and we get to decide who lives and who dies, and that those are godlike powers, and basically, that's what the ideology of eugenics does, and this is a satanic belief system. Nazism was a form of dark occultism. It was a satanic, political ideology and religion. And, this is propagated throughout our society relentlessly. People are in this total me mindset, not caring about what's going on in the wider world. And that's how this propagates this idea of, total enslavement. That's how it propagates the agenda of total enslavement. You have to get people to subscribe to your ideology if you're going to be masters over them at a lower level, and think that there is legitimacy to it and take it on as part of their own belief system. And that's part of the reason that we're in the situation that we're in. People have come to believe that life is all about just selfish pursuit of pleasure. They've come to believe that freedom is about just doing whatever you want without the restriction of morality, of understanding the difference between right and wrong behavior, and without any responsibility. They don't want any responsibilities in life to understand what's going on and to choose the difference between right and wrong behaviors for themselves once they clearly know what that difference is. If people don't know what rights are, that's what they want to wipe out in a satanic culture. They don't want anybody to really understand what a right is. Right is an action that does not cause harm to another being, and hence a wrongdoing is something that does cause harm to another being. It's really actually quite that simple, and people really can't even define that. They can't tell you what a right is, and when you don't know what a right is, you're invariably going to lose them, and that's why our culture is well along the road to tyranny and enslavement, and that I feel is about to go hot. We've been involved in this kind of cold form of tyranny for a long time, but they're building up to try to take more and more rights at a more and more rapid pace. And they want to come in and bring hot tyranny, hot enslavement to the people of the world because they want it all, and they're not going to stop until they essentially have crushed the human soul. That's the ultimate goal in all of this. And, you look at the archetypal image of the devil or Satan, and the goal is basically the same. It's actually named very appropriately. They use the iconographic imagery of, the Christian devil. But if you really look at the ideas, even in ancient Hebrew, Satan, the word Satan, shaitan, meant adversary or the one who opposes. And what they're opposing is the real order in the universe, which is what I call natural law. People have called it spiritual law, moral law, God's laws. It doesn't really make a difference what label you slap on it. It's basically the same thing. They want to turn natural law on its head, and they want to rule instead of that higher force, that higher power, that higher creative intelligence, which is the moral laws of the universe that are not put into place by man, but are put into place by the creator of the universe.
Well, it's interesting because what you're talking about with this feeding upon the soul, a lot of it seems to be contractual. The fact that we are basically surrendering our sovereignty. We are allowing ourselves to go into contract with all these different forms of power over us that are in violation of natural law. As we say, the natural law being, look, my right is, to basically do as I will, as I please, to the point that I'm not harming someone else. So if I'm parking my car in a space that's 1 foot over a red line, I'm not blocking a fire hydrant, and yet the city has the right to charge me $100 for that. That's corrupt, and it's a violation. I'm not harming anyone. I'm not obstructing anything in this process, and yet you're fining me. For your own advantage, right? And that's how most of the corruption happens in our country, at least. In other countries, it may be different. But the point being, in our country, we're willing to pay. So as long as we're paying, for it, we don't really mind if we're paying, thousands of dollars in insurance for potential, things that may never occur to us, or if we're paying, thousands of dollars in tickets for violations that don't harm anyone, right? So we're basically constantly paying, but ultimately, it boils down to this obstruction of our natural rights because we don't know what they are, and yet we allow our society to be regulated down to every degree of existence, such that every day we are violating the laws in so many numbers of ways that if at any moment the officer decides to arrest us or to charge us, we are in violation because of this sort of matrix of law that's been established.
And it just goes to show you how morally relativistic our society is, how morally relativistic all of the laws of man are. Why can you perform a behavior in one state, okay, and you do that behavior in another state or another country, and it's considered a wrongdoing there? You think about it. You could do the same behavior in a different place on the earth. In one place, it's looked at as a right, and no one will come to take your freedom. And in another place, it's looked at as a wrong, where the, quote, authorities, the state, will come and take your freedom as a result of performing the very same behavior. Well,
jaywalking in New York as opposed to Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, right. Try it and you'll see what you get a ticket for, right?
Is it moral in one place and immoral in another? Does man get to decide on his whim or preference what actions or behaviors are right in one place and wrong in another place? I mean, this is the total contradiction and absurdity of the laws of man, and most people can't see the contradiction because they're so brainwashed by the illusion or belief in authority. It's a religion, and that's why most people stick staunchly, steadfastly to it, because you ask them to question their religion and they just can't do it. They can only think with a one-track mind. That's their religious dogmatic belief, and they're sticking to it. This is what moral relativism is about. How could alcohol production, ownership, and consumption have gone from being legal and then in the 1920s, it became illegal in the United States. Then later, it went back to becoming legal. Now, did it go from being moral at that one period in time to then in the 20s becoming an immoral behavior, and then go back to becoming a moral behavior after they repealed that amendment? I mean, absolutely not. Right and wrong behaviors don't change over time. If it's a behavior that harms someone, it's a wrongdoing. If it doesn't harm someone, it's a right, period. For all places, all times, eternally. Right. And this is what I try to explain when I go into what I call natural law. I prefer the term natural law. Some people hate the term and would rather it be called all the time spiritual law, because it's the same thing, or moral law, or even God's law. Okay, so, again, it's just a label, it's just a term. I like the word natural because it emphasizes that it is inherent to creation, which is what the word natural means. We have this notion about natural that it somehow relates to this thing called the natural order in people's minds. Now, what I see as the natural order is completely different than when you say that term to people, what they conjure in their mind about a lion taking down an animal in some field somewhere.
Well, the animalistic natural order as opposed to the human natural order, which ultimately boils down to a responsibility. A responsibility to ourselves, a responsibility to our communities, to others. Now, obviously, we're not talking about becoming authoritarian about what that, where the responsibility begins and ends, but more in an awareness and awakening of learning. I think that's really what it boils down to, is the carrot versus the stick. Are we trying to educate people and help them understand their own sense of morality, responsibility, that they are part of a much greater cosmos of being,
that's right?
That ultimately their actions matter and have consequence, and you can teach them that, or you can beat it into their heads and say, if you don't do it, you're going to go to hell. And that obviously is what leads people, I think, like yourself, to want, to explore Satanism or other forms of rebellion, which is the natural, I think, the natural consequence of trying to beat it into people's heads as opposed to teaching them and saying, look, everything has consequence. Let's understand the science of it. Let's understand, the implication, the cause and effect.
That's it. It's all about cause and effect. It's all about causality and what effects manifest in the world as a result of the causal factors of us putting certain behaviors out into creation. We are invariably, inescapably going to reap the effects of those causes that are put out there by our behaviors. This is what I term natural law. And it's funny how the word natural has been hijacked to think of, as you said, that animalistic, quote, natural order, which isn't order, okay? The word natural simply means inherent to creation and having a basis in reality and truth. And that's all it ever has meant, really. That's the definition of the word. It really simply means not made or caused by humankind, not made or caused by anything that a 3D being can do, okay? It is pre-existing, it is inherent to nature, to reality itself. And that's what this kind of law is. Well, it's like you think of a physical law like gravity or electromagnetism, okay? Man didn't make that. That's going to be in effect whether any humans are here or not. So it's something that exists in nature, in reality, and it's not made or caused by humankind. That's what the word natural means. And a law is an existing condition that is both binding, meaning it has an effect whether you understand it or like it or not, and it's immutable, meaning it cannot be changed by anything that we are capable of doing. So when we put these two things together, okay, natural and law, my definition for this universal force that exists within creation that brings to us the consequences of the behaviors that we choose through our free will, that's what I call natural law. My working definition is universal, non-man-made, binding and immutable or unchangeable conditions that govern the consequences of the behaviors of beings with the capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong behaviors. Right. So that's a mouthful, but if you just break it down and take it a little bit at a time, you'll understand what I mean by natural law, or cosmic, universal, spiritual, moral law, God's law, if you will. Yeah. They're universal, meaning they exist everywhere. Doesn't matter where you go, they're in effect. Non-man-made, no 3D being, for that matter, not even just mankind, made them, okay? The universe made them. The creative underlying intelligence in nature made them. They're binding, meaning they have an effect whether you understand them or not, whether you like that they exist or not. You are affected by them. They are immutable. They are unchangeable by anything we are capable or anyone else is capable of doing. Conditions that govern the consequences. They govern consequences of the behavior of beings that have the capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong behavior. So they govern our behavior. They govern human behavior. Yeah. So natural law is this body of universal spiritual laws that act as the governing dynamics of human consciousness and free will choice. That's what natural law is, and it's the ultimate solution to understanding what's going on in the world. It's the answer to that question, why? Why are we experiencing the loss of freedom that we are? Why is satanic culture basically so prevalent? Why are we descending into tyranny and enslavement as an entire society? The understanding that we do not respect natural law or live within its parameters, within its boundaries, that we do not accept that there is objective morality, that we are always thinking and focused on the self, service to self only. This mentality is creating the reality that we experience, and we are reaping the consequences. This force has been called consequentialism. This whole idea of natural law has in the past been referred to some philosophers as consequentialism, meaning that it is about how we receive the consequences for what we ourselves enact in the world, in the aggregate sense. I mean, this doesn't just work on the individual level, it works in an aggregate sense upon entire societies. So it would behoove us to understand how natural law actually operates to bring us the experiences that we must live and undergo, because we set those effects into motion through the causal factor of choosing through our free will certain behaviors. And when we choose rightly, which means we choose right behavior that is moral, that is in harmony with natural law, we receive one set of consequences. And those consequences are the entire culture becomes more free. So this is intimately and inextricably interwoven and connected with human freedom. When we choose the other behavior, when we choose wrong behavior in the aggregate sense, humanity then receives the consequences of a different result, and we become more enslaved. I call this the law of freedom. You know, as morality in the aggregate sense increases in society, that society of beings becomes more free. As morality wanes or declines and immorality increases in a society, meaning more harm, more wrongdoings, more theft, more behavior that doesn't respect people's life, rights, and property, then that culture becomes more and more enslaved. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines.
Yeah. That's a good place to leave it. So people can follow up more with you on whatonearthishappening.com.
Absolutely. That's my main website. I always recommend to people who are checking it out for the first time to go to the podcast section where all the audio files are at. It's an archive of all of the radio shows that I've done over the past many years, and I recommend that they start at number 1 of that audio archive and progress forward at their own pace. It's a tapestry of information, and if you take it in order without skipping around forward at your own pace, then a new worldview and a new understanding will open up to you. That's my recommendation for people visiting, and the site, once again, is whatonearthishappening.com. Sean, I want to thank you so much for bringing me on Buzzshaw and providing me with the opportunity to speak to your listening audience.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for doing the work you're doing and educating people as you are, because it's really important for people to start to think and understand that the nature of their mind and their worldview is actually affecting their reality.
Absolutely. Once again, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good one. Well, there you have it, folks. It's important to remind you that take a moment, reflect, recognize what brought you into existence. Is there a higher creative force at work? You weren't brought here by yourself on your own. There is always a higher power and higher being. So the question, of course, is where does that leave us? Are we living just for the day, for the moment, or are we actually helping the conscious evolution of mankind? This is Sean Stone signing off.